Who do you collect? 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 Is it rookies? Is it vets in your set? Man, my prism dripping water, that's wet. And my auto get a 10, that's a bet. I might go and sell a slab, get a vet. Hey, who do you collect? Is it rookies? Is it vet? I feel trading cards from the 1800s are the best. We sing like Althea, swing and dominate the net. Yeah, that prism shiny, but them vintage cards really drip. Greatest collection of all time. Sydney Dick, if you stuck on fence, just ask Hattie Schmidt. Old gal, say it loud and represent. London Games, Gold High Jump event, collecting wax and all the facts to sell the truth. Made fags because I couldn't find a Wilma Roo. Like Tina Swoops and Coop, value skyrocketed. It's up to the moon, hidden figures found here. Memories flourish. We just want to tell the stories of cars that's before us. Cause true value won't come in the form of a deposit. You gotta do like Naka do, passion before profit. Who do you collect? Man, today is special for those of you who are looking forward to this as much as I am. We have a legend in the building, on the stage and on our platform. Oh man, someone who I admire, who we admire to the utmost on so many different levels. This human being, we made a song for her. You know what I mean? How much she's impacted our views, not only in trading cards, but also in life and in each other. Right. So without further ado, because I wanna bring her on and kind of give her the right introduction with her here. Hello, 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 hello. Cindy, how are you doing this evening? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Peter. Doing great. What an introduction.
Man, that was just the beginning of it. I really wanted to start it off with you on here, right? And let you know originally, before I ask you our opening question, how I originally found you and what made me become, just so interested in everything that you're interested in. You know what I mean? And it was during the pandemic, early in the pandemic, and we were teaching and learning, distance learning from home. And it was at a time where I was heavily back into the hobby, creating content and learning, a student of the hobby, a historian of the hobby. I thought I had found any and every historical fact or close to historical hobby fact online that I could find, right? So I'm doing that. And then at the same time, I work with boys and girls alike, right? And I always try and find ways to inspire them all. But and I have a daughter. I have three boys, three sons and a daughter. I'm a father of four. And I remember one day my daughter, as I was thinking of a lesson plan for my students, my daughter came into the room. And then at the same time, I think my son was there and we were talking about collecting. And I looked at my toy collection and my card collection, and it was a lack of women representation.
Yeah.
So I took a note to myself, because the first thing that came to my mind was, bro, your daughter came in here and you have maybe 4 toys, 5 toys that are girls out of 300. And what cards do you have of women? Like, this is something you're passionate about. What kind of message are you sending or not sending to them? You know what I mean?
Right.
And I started thinking about that. So I jotted that down, and also my students too. You know what I mean? I always try and incorporate women in the curriculum and things I come up with, but at the same time, it's never been equitable. It's always been lopsided. I have to admit that. I have to hold myself accountable at that point, right? So I wrote down that I have to search and learn about women in the hobby specifically. So I literally Googled women, I think maybe the greatest women's sports card collector or women's sports card collector, and your name came up. All right.
Wow.
Like
Wow.
your name came up in a host of other articles. I think the Tiny Treasures, Giant Legends video was the first one. And then another article from like 2016. I forgot who it was, but those were the first articles I read. And the thing that attracted me the most about it was everything you were speaking about dated earlier than all the history I had known that I was learning from men. You know what I mean? So you had actually predated the hobby further back for me to dig into and learn more and more and more, and not just with men, with women, and women who had been doing things that I didn't know they had been doing for so long. You know, I was ignorant. I didn't know. I have to admit, there's certain things I didn't know. You know what I mean? And when it was exposed to me via your because of your passion for women's trading cards specifically, it opened my eyes to even my own history, Black history, as we'll dive into. And I've told you, there's so many Black athletes that I've learned about now, male and women, because the women lead me to other men, right? That I had no idea about, that you know. So you've made me understand even my culture and my history even more via trading cards. And I always tell people, like, the trading cards are historical facts of the times that they were printed, right? So that was the introduction I wanted to give you. I'm gonna try not to talk a lot, you know what I mean? But thank you so much for being here. And yeah, so how are you feeling today? How was your day today, to start off?
My day was good, and it's a pleasure to be here. I love what you do as well, and your enthusiasm behind it, and bringing the women into your teaching plans, to both your own kids, but also the students that you teach. And it's just, I'll also say, it's just such a great medium to teach, because trading cards have just a general popularity, and they go back a long ways, and that popularity has been passed down from just as it's gone through its evolutions. But it's a neat little vignette of historical knowledge as well, and so they are a fun way to teach. And they still humble me, because I'm still finding cards I've never seen before, and I've been collecting since about 1994 for this genre. And I'll just explain what I collect, which is women's cards, female athletes. For cards that were printed between like the 1850s, which is about as far back as I can find, until 1972. And that cutoff is because of the passage of Title IX in the US. So it's an international collection. I try to focus on cards that were printed around the time that the athlete actually competed. So I don't do a whole lot in aftermarket cards. I think by getting the time that they really competed is a better reflection of the socio-economic standards, if you will, of those times. And so that's what I focus on. And it is an international collection. I own a little over 1,400 cards in this genre, and I've identified a little bit over 2,000. So the list keeps growing. You know, I do keep finding cards that I've never seen before, and it's both humbling and exciting to go through that process.
Right. And I want to get into why a little bit, why we have so many international cards. That wasn't your choice, right? You're kind of forced to get these international because they were only options, right, at the time. So I want to dive into that. But before we dive into that, you talked about how we all use trading cards to teach and to learn at the same time. So to learn a little bit about you, and for you to teach us a little bit about you, I would like for you to think of one individual or a group of individuals who you would like to highlight today, who you would like to publicly give flowers to, someone who has impacted your life, maybe somebody who, you know, you want to give credit to for any particular reason, and explain why. And this particular person today, we're going to put on a trading card. We actually have one of the greatest card artist, engineer, architects in the room right now, Card Killer, my guy. And if we can get him to create a card that you want to highlight someone, who would that someone be and why?
So a few things come to mind, and two of them have cards, and one is a group and they don't, at least not when they competed. So the two folks that were probably the most impactful to my athletic life were Babe Diedrichson, who has a lot of cards, both when she competed, but also aftermarket cards, and Martina Navratilova, who is outside of my collection range time-wise, which is unfortunate. I have some of her cards, but these were people that were outstanding in their athletic field. I didn't know on Babe's side until later, when I was older, how kind of like brash and cocky she was, and that doesn't resonate with me as much. But her accomplishments in a time when it was really difficult for women to compete and be athletes, she excelled from the 30s till she died in the 50s, about 1956. And then Martina, both athletic, of course, accomplished tennis player, one of the best, if not the best in the world, especially for her day. But it was her sportsmanship that really connected with me. And how she treated other people and her honesty. And so those were the two. But the group that doesn't have cards, and it's usually the first question I get, and that is the All-American Girls Baseball League from the 40s and 50s. They have aftermarket cards that were printed in the 80s, but I have never seen any cards printed when they competed. And I don't know why, but yeah, it's usually the first question I get. It's this assumption that I have their cards, and I don't, because I've never seen any. So again, I mean, yes, aftermarket, yes, 80s and the Fritz cards, and I have all,
Right.
you know, a lot of the ones that are out there, but nothing from that I have seen from the 40s, 50s, which is so odd, since baseball cards and baseball just went hand in hand. But there was a paper shortage going on, and maybe that had something to do with it, because it was just post World War II.
Correct.
So,
And
yeah.
there was a big paper shortage that even impacted trading cards as a whole. It impacted anything that had to do with paper, not just cards.
That's probably the biggest reason, is my guess, but yeah, just odd.
Right. So the first you had named a young lady, I forgot her name, but you mentioned something about her attitude or something about something that you didn't identify with. Who is this? What's her name?
So
again?
her formal name was Mildred Diedrichson. She went by Babe because, you know, different stories that go along the way of why she was nicknamed Babe, but she was known as Babe. And then later she married a man with the last name of Zacharias, who was a big Greek wrestler. But, you know, she was lesbian and lived a very closeted life, and, you know, difficult situation to be in. She kind of feminized herself to be more accepted in the 50s for golf. But, you know, had she lived in a different day, she would have no doubt been, you know, the best all around athlete in probably the world. But, you know, everything she did, she excelled at. She won everything she entered in the 1932 Olympics. And it was, let's see, the 80-meter hurdles, the javelin throw, and then she tied with somebody, Jean Shiley, I believe, for the high jump. So they actually gave her a half gold, half silver medal for that. And then she was kind of nicknamed a muscle mole and given a bad rep. A lot of people didn't like she wasn't really muscular. She was actually quite small, but didn't like, you know, overly masculine women, and track. She kind of almost gave track a bad name just because of this association of her excelling so much. And then so somebody printed an ad with her next to a car, and this was this days of amateur athletics. And so they said, "You are no longer an amateur. You can't compete in track and field." So she couldn't compete in the 36 games, and that's why eventually she moved into golf, and was one of the co-founders of the LPGA in 1950.
Okay, so I find this to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this does seem like a common trait, especially when I study or read on a lot of the women that you post about and share with us, that they all played multiple sports. They weren't one-trick ponies, for lack of a better phrase, right? Like, it seems like because there's a woman I'm going to highlight later on who you put me on to, who she played multiple sports and was also a singer, you know what I mean? And did a whole bunch of other things. And those are the things that, I don't want to say trump male accomplishments, but it's make me like, wow, those are it's sad. Like, I have to admit, like, one thing I want to say, I don't want to hold anything back and sugarcoat it. You know what I mean? It's sad that I have to see those accomplishments and say, wow, this is where the value at, because the value should be there, period. You know what I mean? But I have to swallow that pill. And at one point in my life, not too long ago, I had to learn about women who do all the things for me to actually, in this trading card world, understand their value, right? Because I value the women in my life, but I want that to reflect everything I do, and it didn't at a time, right? So that's why it's so important for me and the hobby to learn as much as I can about these women. And I learned that a lot of them played a lot of sports. And back to Babe, too, is I remember you said that maybe her attitude and the way she went about things, you know, isn't the way you go about things today. But do you think it's because of the way she was treated and the time she was going through that made her the way she was, maybe?
Kind of yes and no. I mean, the social pressures were to be feminine for sure, and that also meant behaviors. Right. You know, Babe was kind of just a brash person, but she was also very colorful in her language, and so she learned how to work things for herself. And I think she also saw the writing on the wall that if if she was going to make it, she had to make it. She had to do it. She wasn't going to be able to rely on someone else. And so she used her wits. I don't even remember if she graduated from high school, because she was kind of like recruited for a basketball team that worked with an insurance company in Texas. But she knew that she had to use her smarts and her wits to advance and promote herself. And so some of that was trash talking other people. Like she's famous for walking into a locker room and saying, but the babe's here, who's coming in second? and she would play her harmonica on the train, as the Olympic team went to LA, she would play her harmonica and keep people up till like 2 a.m. or all night. And, just to make them like tired. And so she did things like that were a little bit like not as, pro sportsmanship, to the point where some of her teammates were actually, hoping that, like in this Jean Shiley case in the high jump, they were just hoping Jean would win because they were so tired of Babe and her braggadocious ways. But she did break many glass ceilings in women's sports because of this. And, to her credit, she advanced women's sports in so many ways. So, yeah. And, she's still relevant today. She was, multi-time, the AP athlete of the year. She was, I think, I don't remember the exact accolade, but like she's the most prolific athlete of the 20th century, all around female athlete. I think she's the number 6 athlete, and definitely the first woman listed on a Wheaties box.
Wow.
And that goes back to the 30s, I believe. It was shortly after her Olympic debut. So, yeah, so she did make a huge impression, and the media actually loved her in some ways because they just never knew what was going to come out of her mouth. So,
Right.
It was kind of a love-hate relationship.
Okay. So we talked. I wanted to dive a little bit about Babe because I've read a little bit about her. You know what I mean? But I just like hearing the stories from you. So I want to get back on you real quick. And you was always going to get right back into the trading cards because this is about. But I want to take it back. So to my knowledge, and I've watched you on Stacking Slabs. I believe you were on Cardboard Culture,
Yeah.
and shout out to those guys for you know what I mean, having you on. I love watching their show, and they really ask some great questions at the same time. And some of these answers may sound repetitive, you know what I mean? So bear with me, but I want to take our viewers back and people who may not know you. On this show, we kind of like to highlight feelings and emotions before just trading cards, because no matter if you collect trading cards or not, you can identify with feelings and emotions, right? So as we get into feelings and emotions, I want to start off because what I know about you is you had a 20-year gap or something like that where you didn't collect between 10, I believe, and around 30 where you didn't collect. And you had a pretty impressive card, or from whenever you did start collecting to 10, you had some impressive cards. So I want you to tell us a little about as much as you would like to share about where you're from, right? What was your childhood like growing up, things like that, who was in the household, and your first memories of stories and starting this collection, and then start from 10 years old and what you did with that collection.
Okay. I was raised in Reston, Virginia. It's in Northern Virginia outside of DC, and it was a new town in the 1960s, and it was intentionally built to be desegregated, which was fantastic. And that's why my parents picked it. So one of the things it was designed, it was a planned community and one of 2 planned communities in the country at the time. And the creator of it wanted it to be like a European model in which you had towns and villages and paths that connected those to neighborhoods. And so I had like easy access and safe access through bicycling, I could go to school, I could go to the local village, if you will, or the town. And but the other thing that went hand in hand with this European model is soccer was really big in this town. Like it wasn't Pop Warner football, it was soccer. And almost every kid I knew played youth soccer. So I wasn't very good at it, but I grew up playing soccer and then went into other sports. But with my kid friends, pre 10 years old, I remember buying baseball cards, probably tops. I remember the smell of the gum and the texture of the cards, and we would trade. And so I had this shoebox of cards, and the only card I actually remember was a Hank Aaron card.
And,
so
and can you talk about a little bit more this because you just gave us a scent and a touch right there. What did it
Uh-huh.
smell like, and what did it feel like? Like, describe that.
Yeah, just like that stick of gum, that
Uh-huh.
hard kind of pinkish stick of gum, and it just smelled like gum, and
What did it make you feel like? Like that, those moments when you were with your friends and you
yeah.
had those packs, what were the feelings that, what were the feelings and emotions you were going through in those moments?
So somebody explained to me, when something's wrapped, the magic to something wrapping gifts, and this is the same with trading cards, when it's wrapped, is underneath that could be anything. And so it's that not knowing of what you're going to get. And I think at the time it was like 3 cards in a pack, and very random, and a stick of gum. So the cards always, for at least a little while, would retain that smell of the gum. They were cardboard. They had stats on the back. I mean, most of us know what baseball cards look like from the day. And then traded them, and it was a social thing. I don't even remember following baseball that much. That was the funny thing. So I'm not sure why. Maybe I just had this like collector gene, this latent collector gene in me all the time. But yeah, so I remember selling the box. We had like this, big open air market thing at one of the villages, and I liked money and when I was a kid. And so I remember selling them, and that was the last I thought about those, until I was yard sailing and back in Virginia. Moved around a little bit, but back in a different part of Virginia, in more of the country in Harrisonburg. And I was doing my master's degree, and I was yard sailing. And so here I am, knee deep in research about women's sports and visual representation. And but here I am yard sailing, and that's when I came across my first women's card. And a little kid was, sitting there with his table full of men's sports cards, and I just kind of glanced at it, and I can't remember if he pointed it out or if I saw it, but I saw a Manon Riom card, who is a hockey player, ice hockey player, and she had a lot of cards for a few reasons. There was rumored that she could make the pros as a goalie and be the first woman in the NHL, and the other reason is she's very pretty, and so it kind of went hand in hand, and the card market really blew up around her, and produced a lot of cards. And so I started to dabble back into the card world. I would go to sport card shows and ask if they had women's cards. And I would go to sport card stores. And this is before eBay or anything online was available. And so little by little, I would find out, what sets women were in. And I could go into a card store, ask for women's cards, and they'd be like, no, don't have any. And then I would start rattling off different sets, and I would leave with, a stack of cards, and they just didn't know that they were even in these mixed sets. But those were all contemporary cards. That was the glut of the 1990s, when card companies were just kind of almost cannibalizing each other at the time. But what it did is it allowed for, in this, furied competition, it allowed for some space for women's cards. This is even before the WNBA. So through that process, I was at another, like a mall, I think, in Harrisonburg, and underneath this glass cabinet in this kind of like the middle of the kiosk of malls, when they were having, I guess, a sport cards show and toy show or something. But I just kind of glanced down, and there was this old card, and I couldn't really, my mind didn't wrap around like what it was, but I could tell she was an athlete, and I could tell it was old. And he pulls it out, and that's what set me on this path. And basically, I literally felt kind of this like energy in me, this, as I described, bubbles of excitement in my blood. And
bubbles of excitement.
Yeah, I did. I just was like, what is this? And I knew I was onto something. I just didn't know what it was at the time. And, for a while, I still collected contemporary cards. And as my vintage card collection grew, I just realized there's a lot out here. And so I started to really focus my resources of being, time and money onto these pre-1972 cards. And then that opened up a whole nother world. It's like between my academic research side and my physical work side, it's half of my life has been in athletics that way. And still, these cards were exposing me to people I had never heard of before. And it was really kind of mind blowing that of this little medium of a trading card. Like, for example, I have some set aside here.
Share time early. Okay.
Yeah, I know. So this is an old one of Betty Robinson. She goes by Elizabeth as her formal name. But this is an early trading card what they would call a tobacco card, and this was from Sweden in 1932. And she's our first gold medalist in the 100-meter dash in the 1928 Olympics. So just, both international and American athletes that I was learning about through trading cards. And for me, it was a perfect medium because I'm not, I don't love to spend my time in books. I'd much rather be doing something active. And so this was like a little, visual vignette of the past, and it was enough to hook my interest to learn more about somebody instead of reading a long history book, page after page of women's sports history, which even for me, that would put me to sleep, I think, eventually. Yeah.
Okay, that's perfect. That's perfect because I can't let you get away with leaving out some stories about that 20-year gap, because all of us have as collectors have had an experience or a point in our time where many of us have had to put the cards away for a minute.
Yeah.
You said at 10 years old, you chose to sell them for whatever reason you sold them for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
you said you didn't like to read books, or you don't like to read, you like to learn, you like to be active. Tell us a little bit about who you were as a child, the kind of students you were, a little bit about the sports you played, and what were you doing in the interim? What were your goals, your dreams in that gap time when you weren't collecting? What were you doing?
I was a pretty good student. I always felt like I was more of a C student, but then growing up and after high school, I came to find out that I was lucky to go through the #1 county in the country for education. And so it was a hard system. Looking back on grades, it was more A, B, and maybe some C's, but I always got A in PE. I love PE. But I ran track through 4 years of high school. I did 1 year of JV basketball my freshman year until it was clear this was not my sport. But I really loved the sport of volleyball, and my high school didn't have it. I got myself involved in some camps and club teams and was able to eventually get a partial scholarship to the college I went to for my last 2 years. And so it's just for me, I love both sports, but those are my competitive sports backgrounds from high school and college. Moved from Virginia to Arizona to Maine, back to Virginia, and now I'm back in Arizona. So I hope the looping stops now. Let's see. What else can I answer you?
And then I wanted to circle back on another thing. The hockey player, the first hockey player that you said you collected, what was her name?
Manon Riom. So she's French Canadian, and so it looks like Manon Riom, but it's Manon.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, and you mentioned that she was it at that time, right? Because she was pretty, she was attractive, and she was great at what she did.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And you said that there were several companies actually printing her cards. Can you what do you know about these companies, and where were these cards coming from, and how many is a lot? Like 2, 3, 4, 5? You know what I mean?
No, I would say she's probably has more somewhere between 20 and 40, if not more. Flair, Upper Deck, Tops. Almost all of them got into the Manon game. And, some are really, really nice too. And some are ones where she's full garb hockey gear. And some are where she's in Sunday clothes and pretty model. And, you wouldn't even know she's an athlete. And women, I think, get kind of pushed and pulled into both of those realms a lot more than men do in sport card world. But most of them are her as an athlete.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And talk a little bit about now with do you know did she play multiple sports? I assume you played multiple sports. Doesn't mean you excelled in multiple sports, right? But you enjoyed playing multiple sports, of course, liked or loved some more than others. Did she play any other sports that you know of?
I don't know if she did. I don't know too much about her background, but another Canadian hockey player, and her name will come to me in a minute, but she was actually better well known for track and field in the 30s, was also a multi-sport athlete. She's kind of like the Babe Didrikson of Canada, except she had to end her career even earlier than Babe did due to a really severe case of arthritis. And her name is escaping me, but I have a few of her cards. It will come to me. It's another one where she took a nickname, and gosh darn it, I can't even think of her name, but it will come back. But she also played hockey, as I think a lot of Canadians did as well. But no, I don't know too much about Manon's background.
Okay. Okay. And I don't know when we want to start. Let's start. I have a question. Let's start from 1850. Because you said that's pretty much. I'm pretty sure you have some cards that may
Yeah.
date a little bit earlier or earlier than that, right? I think the first card I saw from you, it was a wrestler, and I believe not Heidi Smith. Heidi the fence. She's a fencer. But I want to say her name is still Heidi, but I could be wrong.
Hattie Stewart was the
Heidi Stewart.
boxer.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes, that's the
yeah,
boxer. That's the boxer.
yeah,
Okay, so like I learned about her, and I'm like, wow, because that trading card dated back to any other male trading card that I can find. You know what I mean? So that's what
yeah.
really put me onto it and learning. I want to talk about. Let's just start with the 1850s because it had to start somewhere. It obviously started
Hmm.
before that, but just for trading cards and first to have a start time. Let's start from the 1850s. And I mean, we can take this as far as we want to, unfortunately, probably into today too, right? Which is sad. But what type of things why was sports an escape, or what kind of things were women battling and facing at the time as far as like equity and things that they were, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
kind of challenges were going on during that time specifically
So
for
first I'll
women?
say that the cards back then from the 1800s to about the 1880s ish were known
Mhm.
as trade cards,
Right.
which differentiate from trading cards because of how they were distributed, and usually their size is a little bit bigger. But trade cards represented a person's trade. So if I was a shoemaker and a customer came in, I would give them my card at the end of a transaction. It could be the bill of sale, it could just be advertising, but it was a way to advertise their trade. So that's where the word trading, word comes from in trading cards. And so these early ones usually represent women in sports. And so meaning that they're a drawing of somebody in sports, because photography obviously wasn't as common and much easier to draw. And so they were doing things like croquet, ice skating, but not competitive. Tennis is an acceptable sport for women, shuttlecock, things like that.
Right.
So I don't do a lot actually with trade cards. I've collected a few as samples. Bicycling is another one. Just because I believe it's an important stepping stone in both this history of trade to trading cards and sport card world, but also I just think you need to see somebody doing something in order to maybe want to do it. I mean, not that that's the precursor, that's the only thing you have, but if you have something in print, sometimes it helps to see it and see somebody else if you don't know about it. And so those early ones are trade cards. They became trading cards for a variety of reasons, and it differentiates in different countries. But like in the US, the Postal Service changed their way of who could make postcards, who could serve, or who could be delivered on rural routes, the mailing of catalogs. And so now instead of expecting a customer to come to you, you could target market your customer and
Right.
mail catalogs. And so anybody could make a postcard and sell it for a penny. So things like that, it changed, and the trade cards started to fade. And so trading cards were picked up largely by cigarette companies, which is funny. It seems like sports, and especially women's sports, seems to always have this tie back to tobacco, oddly enough. And so it started, I think, more in Europe, and then eventually made its way to like the colonies and to the United States. And it just picked up in its popularity. So if you've heard the story about tobacco cards and how the cigarette pack needed something to stiffen the pack, and so marketers are, they put in this blank piece of cardboard, and that quickly became something printed on because they knew trade cards were so popular and they were collected. So then they became, cigarette cards, and eventually they worked their way into other things like gum and other confectionaries, into trading cards, and became a wildly popular collectible as well, to where people would, sometimes just buy the product just to get more cards because that was the only way you could.
Right.
So this Hattie Stewart card, circling back to that, is important because in my collection anyways, from what I can tell, and that card was printed in 1888, and it's an American tobacco card. And so she was a female boxer and a competitive boxer, a pugilist, is, I believe, is the way they would say it. And so she's the first real athlete I have in the collection. And so I could start it at 1888, but I do think that some of the trade cards are important in this lineage.
I read she used to beat guys up. Is this true? Like,
Yeah, well, yeah. So it was almost like vaudeville, you know. I mean, this is a way, like, women had very limited ways to make money. It's almost like they almost had to get married. They had very little rights. They couldn't own property. They couldn't buy things, you know. So it was like they had to get married in order to survive. And so it was not always common for women to be able to be self-supporting. I believe she was married. There was another woman named Hattie in the US that also said she was the best in the world. And so they were going to have a fight to prove it. And the other Hattie died before they could do that. And so, you know, I mean, you can imagine the day when you didn't have social media or anything kind of fast media. People could say what they wanted to say, and you'd have to prove them wrong.
Right. But and help me, because I'm trying to piece it together. When I Google these women's names, a lot of other aliases come up with their names. And then, like, they even have some sites where it records some of their actual matches and stuff, and other names that they fought or competed under. Why did these women have to have so many names? And then also something common that I found out too, you mentioned they had to be married. I also found something common was a lot of the managers or coaches were married to the wrestlers at the same time, right? Is this true, or is this me just looking at a one-off incident?
I don't know that much in the history of wrestling. I just know that it does have a long history with women and boxing, that women have been part of both for a long time. I can't answer. I'm not that well versed on the marriage side of things, but nicknames, I think that kind of goes part with the sport. It just makes somebody more colorful in their personality. Even roller derby, of course, they all have nicknames, and I don't know why that is, but I think it sounds better than Jane Smith. It's like the Blonde Bomber or something. They can make up something.
Right. I mean, and they were, I didn't know it existed, right? No one ever told me, so I didn't know. But like a lot of these women, and we're talking 1888 and before, they were fighting hundreds of fights in a year, not like in a career, in a year's worth of time. So whereas now, if you fight 50 fights, that might be your career. These women were fighting hundreds of fights in a year, so that's crazy.
And bare-fisted. This is the other important thing about the Hattie Stewart card, is it's this transitional period between fighting bare-fisted, and women even sometimes pre-1888 fought bare-breasted, like the men. So if you see old boxing cards of men, a lot of times they just maybe have like tights on the bottom. They don't have anything on the top. And women, for whatever reason, sometimes did the same. So 1888 marks this transitional period. In the card, you can see it. She's got bare fists in one picture, and then she's got little white gloves in a smaller picture built into the card. So that's the time period where they started to adopt some of the rules we know accept today in boxing. So I couldn't imagine doing one fight bare-fisted, let alone the number that they were doing. And sometimes these were just like back barroom fights, or like I said, like kind of like more like a vaudeville spectacle. It wasn't that accepted for women to box, as you can imagine. This really went against the Victorian standard for women, which, basically their main role in life was to be a mother and bear children and raise a family. That was, job number one, and don't deviate. So, it was hard for women to survive on their own without being married. And also in the days of amateur competition, which really starts to pick up around the 1920s, you weren't supposed to work. I mean, you weren't supposed to make money at anything you do around sport. And this is for men and women. It was a huge point of honor to compete as an amateur athlete. And, today, a lot of times we see that looking back as like something that would handicap somebody and it did. I mean, for a lot of women, if they wanted to excel, they had to, like today, dedicate time and money to be the best at their sport. So it was pretty hard to do that and try to do some kind of career where you're paid menial wages to survive. So that's one thing why I just love these older gals, and I affectionately call them the old gals, but like especially the ones from the 20s and 30s, just because they had so much up against them in order to compete. And so these little, visual histories through cards is just really fascinating.
And why is it important to tell these stories and share these stories, in your opinion?
I think the cards can visually unearth a huge history of women athletes. And what it shows is that women have always competed as long as they've had the opportunity. This mantra that has gone on for decades, at least in the US, that girls aren't interested in sport. Look at the numbers, women aren't interested in sport. And it's like, they just didn't have the opportunity. And so when they were able to carve it out, they did, and they played. I mean, I think it's just a human nature that some of us really love being active and love sport, and some love art and music. And like, there's all different talents. But the other thing that makes trading cards such a special medium is that, like, today cards are sold by themselves. People buy packs of Tops or Fleer, Upper Deck, or whatever the company is, and they're sold without another product. And so these cards, were really carefully selected to represent a product, whether it was tobacco or gum or coffee or margarine, whatever it was.
Right.
They became the face, of that product because, I'm trying to find a card. We'll go with Althea's very famous card. Like all cards, she's got, this is, she's got a product that she's part of. And so these older cards in particular, it's like there was a selection process, I'm sure, when they decided who was going to be on their card. And so to pick women athletes at all is just, really stunning.
Well, yeah. See, you brought up Althea. I was waiting for the moment to bring up Althea. That was one of the first African American Black women that I learned. I didn't know who she was until I started picking apart your page. Like, I wanted to, even if I can't remember their names, I looked up every card you've posted, and I've at least read about them once, if not multiple times. And I've done several lessons during the pandemic, specifically on a lot of these individuals, and a lot of our girls at our school identify for some reason, not just because they play sports, because a lot of the girls at school don't like to play sports, but it's something about their story that you highlighted that we're ever to find, that they're like, oh wow, she did that and she overcame that during this time. But Althea Gibson had our girls during the pandemic thinking they can do any and everything.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I mean, because she did any and everything she wanted to do, right? Talk about a little bit Althea Gibson. Why Althea Gibson for you? Why is she somebody special to you?
She was one of these breakthrough athletes in the tennis world, no different than Jackie Robinson was in the baseball world. She was the first African-American woman or player at all, because she predates Arthur Ashe, to step foot on the grass of Wimbledon. And not only that, she won, and she won several times, I believe. She was an outstanding female athlete in the 50s. Particularly, I think that was the highlight of her career. 40s, maybe even starting in the 40s, but she would win in a lot of the African-American circuits. Like, they had a really established tennis league, but there wasn't crossover into the US. It was USLTA, US Lawn Tennis Association, which was pretty much all white. And they made up rules around that time that excluded Blacks without saying no Blacks. So it was things like you had to win a championship in the USLTA circuit to advance in it, which of course she wasn't allowed to. And so it was Alice Marble's advocacy and pretty much shaming USLTA to allow her in. And once they did, I mean, she won the Wimbledon, US Open, the French Open. And so she won these like several times in the 50s until it was clear that it's like, she said, I can't eat trophies, so she couldn't make money off of tennis. Right. She couldn't make money off of teaching or writing about it or anything. And yet they were kind of using her as this ambassador of women's tennis, both in the US and around the world. But she, kind of reluctantly, my understanding is she didn't really want to be in that role. She wanted to play, but she knew how important that her visibility was to the country. I mean, especially African Americans, but also to the country. It opened up. It was another groundbreaking experience in sports and a move towards equality. So after tennis, at some point, she became the first African American woman in the LPGA, the Golf Association that had just formed a few years prior. So she wasn't nearly as good of a golfer as she was a tennis player, but she does have both of those accolades of being the first in both sports.
And I thought it was really cool too, because when I first learned about her, of course, I tried to get the trading cards and anything I could. I couldn't
Good
find
luck.
anything. Yeah, I couldn't
Yeah.
find anything. So the first thing I got was just a photograph. I don't even think it's an original photograph. I didn't care because it told a story. It had the newspaper printing on the back of it. And it just took her guy. I think it was one of the U.S. Opens, I want to say maybe 1954, and she had beat a Hispanic woman who had also, I forgot her name, but she had pretty much accomplished the same thing in her
Yeah.
own right to
Yeah.
be there, right? That was like a historic championship
Mhm.
match,
Mhm.
right? And Althea happened to win, but during that gap between tennis and golf, she was also a professional singer.
Yeah, yeah. So she was one of these multi-talented people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so in my research, and I'm doing research for hopefully a book, but I'm kind of going by decades, and I'm up to about 1930. So I've dabbled on her life, but I still, there's a lot more to learn for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot more, and I just that's another part too that I just love to highlight and let our young
Mhm.
ladies, all our students know, because the boys open their eyes too, and they're like, "Wow, what? That's
Yeah.
amazing!" But that she did so many things, and the fact that you made an important point that the USA wanted her to be up there. She was so good. They wanted
Mhm.
to use her, for lack of a better phrase, right? And she was at this point to where, look, I love the game not for what you're trying to make for me, but she understand that there's a bigger purpose. But there was a point in her life where they, like you said, they didn't want her to play at all. You know what I
Right.
mean? So to come
Right.
from not wanting to play at all, and then now the same group wants you to play. You mentioned the name Alex Marble. Who is Alex Marble? And like you, if it like it sounds
Yeah.
like if it wasn't for Alex, we all have advocates. We all have people who
Yeah.
look out for us. Nobody does it alone. You know, I always say a term we use in the streets is we get it out the mud, meaning we get it on our own. We get it when we're dirt. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? But
Yeah.
there's always somebody who helps us. You know what I
Yep.
mean? In some
Oh,
shape, form, or
definitely.
fashion, even when you have nobody. You know what I mean? So who was
Yeah.
Alex Marble?
So Alice was
Alice, sorry.
sorry, yeah,
Mhm.
it's my pronunciation. Alice was a former champion tennis player who was big in the 30s. So Althea came onto the scene in the 40s, but particularly the 50s. So Alice once won the US Open and once won Wimbledon. And she kind of went in and out of tennis because at some point she was diagnosed with tuberculosis. And, you know, through one of her early US Open, she had like what would be equivalent to probably heat stroke. And so that kind of hurt her immune system. So she had great championship potential, but she also had a lot of health problems. And as she retired, she turned pro for a little bit, which was unusual because, again, most people didn't. So if you were really good and you turned pro, you didn't have a lot of really good people to play against. And people quickly got tired of, you know, watching subpar games. And so it kind of worked against the whole pro structure. But she, you know, gave lessons. Sally Ride was one of her tennis young proteges, the astronaut, and other tennis players. But yeah, so she always was one as an advocate for equal rights and equality, and she hated to see things so lopsided. And so when she, you know, heard Althea's story, she basically shamed through a letter the Lawn Tennis Association, saying you need to let her in. If you're going to say these other people are their best, but here's, you know, somebody else in this whole different tennis circuit, prove it. You know, let her in. Let's see what happens. Now, the big question to ask your students is, why didn't we see a floodgate of other African American athletes follow her? And I didn't know this, and I didn't really think of this, but this is an example of systematic racism. Once they let her in and she won, they created a rule in which you had to again win. Like I think they would only accept one person, like the champion from the I think it was the ATA, the African American League, which they didn't call it that, and I apologize for not knowing what ATA stands for, but the American Tennis Association. But it would only accept one. And so this curbed, you know, the admittance, if you will, into this still very white tennis club, if you will. Yeah. So
Shout
systematic
out Alice.
racism.
Shout out
Yeah.
Alice though, because
Mhm.
we could. This is one thing I say that in society today, one word, which is a true word, right, that always gets highlighted is white privilege. But one
Yeah.
thing I like to say is we all have privileges.
Mhm.
And they work differently. They work to our advantage. They work to our disadvantages. It's about using the privilege you do have.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So shout
Yeah.
out to Alice. Like me myself, I'm privileged. I can say I'm privileged in many rights. I'm
Mhm.
38. I still have both of my parents with me. They've been married for 39 years. You know what I
Wow.
mean? I know a lot of friends
Yeah.
and family who can't say the same exact thing. That's a privilege to me. So I use the lessons that
Mhm.
they taught me to make sure I can give back to the youth. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Any
Yeah.
type more than just my job and what I get paid to do. I try and use the privileges that I have, the resources that I have to share and help somebody else out and hopefully be an Alice, you know what I mean, to
Yeah.
somebody, to
Yeah.
just one person in my lifetime. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's amazing. I want to talk about, man, I want to talk about everything and everybody, but there's some things I
Yeah.
want to dive into. And you talked about this earlier about and I'm just curious. I'm not, I don't know if you know this or not, but you talked about how when people were these either photographs or drawings of these athletes, right?
Mhm.
Do you have any knowledge of any women who were behind the camera or behind the pencil, or have any stories or anything like that from that angle?
I've read about a few that became sports journalists, and
Mhm.
one is the woman I was trying to think of her name before, Bobby Rosenfeld from Canada. So
Mhm.
after she ended her, athletic career pretty early on, again because of like really bad arthritis, she became a sports reporter. And so sometimes that would happen. I don't know of any actually ones that, behind the pictures. I think that was a fairly male dominated field. But I have read along the lines of a few, female sports reporters.
Right.
Oftentimes they got pushed into like more like the social pages and the gossip pages and the columns. But on occasion, they could write about sports. And especially if they had a high profile name like Helen Wills Moody, the tennis player, they know that could possibly sell papers because that name lends credibility to what they were saying, as opposed to somebody who's not known.
Men are lucky because if they let women get a camera and take pictures of men, they're gonna take the best pictures. Women take the best. All the girls in my school take the best pictures of themselves, selfies. They know the angles to take. And
Yeah.
if it's just been a bunch of men taking pictures of men, no disrespect, men, but I think the ladies know how to make us look a little bit better. You know what I mean? And let the sunlight hit a little bit.
That's
Um,
funny.
I I wanted to segue into about art and you specifically and why art's important to you. That's why I brought that up too. If
Hmm.
you couldn't name a story about that, I know you have some art passion, but I wanted to highlight one reason why I said that specifically in acts because I've a lady or a young girl has asked that question before in the class, and I haven't been
Hmm.
able to answer that to her, but there's a card that I always bring up, a basketball card, a James Harden card. James Harden is a basketball
Yep.
player, and he
Hmm.
won the MVP, I think, in 2018 or 19, sometime. I don't know. Somebody correct me in the comments when it was, but he has a mosaic basketball card. It's an MVP card, and he's in a suit, right? A camouflage suit.
Hmm.
And it's actually a black woman who designed who suited him in that suit, who's his stylist, and she's also
Interesting.
Serena Williams stylist at the same time.
Wow.
So for me, it was like, wow, here I can bring a card in and teach everybody about somebody who's not an athlete via the card
Yep.
and how she's making an impact on sports, on people's lives. Like every picture you've seen Serena Williams in, this young lady has dressed Serena Williams. Same thing, James Harden.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Wow.
So a host of so many other people, and just how all of what our passions can intertwine.
Hmm.
And you know what I mean? Like, as much as I love sports, I challenge myself daily to not use sports, to use sports that I don't know about more. You know what I mean? I use the sports I know is bait, and I try and learn with the kids as much as I can with the things that we don't know about. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many careers that are tied to sports. It could be in medicine, photography, news journalism, nutrition. I mean, you name it, the hospitality industry. I mean, athletic trainers. I mean, there's just so many professions that are tied to sport, and they are a great tool. Like, just take a picture of of an arena, and you could point out, just probably at least a dozen careers, if not more, that aren't
Easy.
have anything to do with being an athlete.
Right.
Yeah.
So So that was just a little off topic, but back on the topic. I asked you about the art. You know, I see a picture behind you. I'm not going to
Yeah.
assume that's your piece of art, or I don't know if it is, but I know art does have a special place in your heart, correct?
Yeah. So my mom's a professional painter, and I was always, I was kind of raised around this world of art, and through her galleries and just, places that she was in, or going to museums in DC, like the Corcoran and the Hirshhorn Gallery, or her church. So I always had art around me, and some art classes in high school. That is my piece. Usually I have a sports picture up there actually, but it's a photograph behind glass, and the glare from my light, to just kind of drowns it out. So I needed something a little flatter and more interesting than my wall. But I'm not really a painter. I kind of started dabbling in that in the pandemic. But I have done sculptural work for quite a while, and particularly in wood. And I have a little bit of a line with a side business called On Her Mark, and I take vintage women's trophy toppers and I make them into usable things, like whether they're doorstops or business card holders or things like that. And so it's a way again to bring back a little bit of women's sport history into something that's usable. So I like creating with my hands, be it pottery, sculpture. I have a better mind for three-dimensional things, where I can kind of see them in my brain before I make them, versus a blank canvas, which is totally daunting to me, and to try to paint things. So.
And talk
And,
about, you said you love using your hands,
mhm.
and can you tell us, this is going to be common, what feelings, emotions when you create, when you feel like, talk about from
Yeah.
the beginning to the end, what kind of feelings and emotions do come up when you're in this process?
When something's going really well, it's like that's all I want to do is just keep working on that project. Most of the work, again, is like with sculpting wood. And it could be into a frame, it could be a three-dimensional object. The thing I like to do most is take a block of wood and carve a solid item into it. And probably one of my favorite pieces is an elk because of the horns, and it was just really difficult. So sculpting is about subtracting, painting is about adding, and so you're adding to a canvas, whereas sculpting is about taking things away. So I love the smell of the wood. I love to see things transform. Usually they will look a lot worse before they get better,
Right.
and they look really rough. I use a variety of things, from router tools to a Dremel tool to hand chisels. And then typically it involves a ton of sanding, because the things I use, or the shapes I create, usually aren't malleable to a flat sander. So it's a kind of an organic wavy shape often, and that's a hand sanding job. I joke that I've like sanded off my fingertips because it's taken hours and hours. And if you ever want to teach a kid patience, teach them how to sand, because it's a long process, but it's a rewarding process because wood is so beautiful.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So just two of your passions we talked about, collecting
Mhm.
and then art, right? Collecting in art.
I collect toys too.
Oh, you collect toys too?
I do.
What kind of toys?
Yeah, well, no surprise, female action figures, but I kinda
What?
did the same thing. I in the '90s, I got into it, and also some GI Joes, because I played with Joes as a kid, for me, in the early '70s, and so the 12-inch, very articulated joints, and love those old guys. But yeah, so I got into collecting female action figures in the '90s, and they just take up a lot more space than cards do. So I stopped that, probably late '90s or so, more or less. I mean, if I see something cool today, I'll still pick it up. But yeah, I've got quite a few bins in my house.
Oh yeah, because I'm a big toy person. I collect Marvel Black Panther toys.
Mhm,
So
awesome.
anything Marvel Black Panther, ever since 2015 when he
Yeah,
first appeared on Civil War, I thought it was cool because I
yeah.
also liked him and a few other Marvel characters when I was younger. So I just thought it was cool. And then 2 years later, a childhood friend, pretty much a family friend, ended up directing the movie, the Black Panther
Wow,
movies, Ryan Coogler. So
wow.
from there, I just thought, you know what, I might as well. Ryan's dad used to be my younger brother's basketball coach and our track coach growing up. We grew up in a community where everybody's parent was your parent or your
Mhm.
coach, or you know what I mean.
Yeah,
We were
yeah.
privileged in that right. I went to a
Mhm,
private school from
mhm.
preschool to 12th grade. You know what I
Wow.
mean? To me, that's a privilege. You know what I mean? It might
Yep.
not have been the best private school. My parents were doing the best they could to put me in the best situation they felt. So
Yeah.
I definitely was raised around a lot of solid adults who had our best interest.
That's
So I
awesome.
knew I was gonna go somewhere with the collecting and the art, right? You would consider these two things like passions that you
Mhm.
love.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, definitely the focus has been on the vintage cards more so than probably anything, but uh, I need an outlet and I need a balance,
Yes,
be it,
yes, yes, yes,
art, music, being in the outdoors,
yes.
having sports or doing some kind of exercise. Uh, I need a balance of, social time and introverted time and quiet time. And I don't know if this is just part of my nature baked into me as a Libra needing balance, but I can tell when I'm off balance, if you will. And it's like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, I haven't done a creative project in a while. Let me go buy some wood or something. And or just do something with my hands or vice versa, any of the things that I've been lacking to bring that balance back.
Yeah, see, you helped me there. So what I was gonna ask is, I know it's fun when you do it, and you pretty much answered the question, but I want to put it in other ways for maybe somebody else can understand and relate to. So is it therapeutic? I know it's fun, but in ways,
Yeah.
is in any way is collecting and or art therapeutic? Would you consider it good for your mental health at any point in time? And if so, when? What are you feeling when you need to go to that as to help your balance?
hmm I'll go further than that. I think it's just
Uh-huh.
needed for my soul, more than just mental health.
Ooh.
It's like it's
Ooh.
needed for my soul to
Soul
do
soup.
this.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not like I'm so off balance and all of a sudden it's like this huge void, but I'll just notice it from time to time that yeah, it I'll just feel maybe grumpy or something and like cranky. And so it's like, well, what am I not doing that I should be doing? Or what am I missing? And then I'll start something, and with creating art, I think what's neat about it is it's very immediate. I mean, it takes a long time, maybe 100, up to 100 hours or so to really finish a project, but every step of the way I can see a change. And that's immediate feedback. Like you're in the profession of teaching, and I think you get feedback on a day to day, but that really heartfelt, like you made a difference in my life, you might not hear for 20 years
You might,
from
yeah,
a,
it takes a
yeah,
while. Right,
it
right.
does, it does. And
Facts.
so I'm too impatient for that, so I need something faster, I think. And it's the same with securing cards. Like I just found and bought a card off somebody that was completely unexpected. It's probably going to be the marquee card right now, anyways, of my
Is that the
collection.
one? Is that the one that's been pasted in another book or on top of something? I was reading one of your
Um,
comments, and you had purchased a
no,
card that's stuck. Okay, because I want to hear about the card you're mentioning and that
yeah.
one.
Um, you'll have to tell me more about the card. Oh, yeah, yeah, I remember that one too.
Can you? Or I wrote it down. I gotta find it. I forgot the name
I
of it.
think
I'm gonna write it down.
so. I'll start with the one I just found that
Okay.
this is the amazing thing about this hobby is it's not that I don't know where the end is, but I know there has to be an end within this time period because the time's up. There has to be a
Right.
finite amount. And through eBay, I see a lot of the same cards again and again. So I think I was searching for a card around Alice Marble, which led me to a retail site in, I think, the UK, which then led me into seeing other cards that he had either for sale or he had for sale but sold. And one of them was a team that I actually wrote a blog about on her mark called the Dick Kerr, it's Kerr, women's
Mhm.
soccer team that came out of England. And in my blog, I had written that I had never seen a card of them. Or I think I went further, and this was my big mistake. I said none exist, which bad for me because I should never say that because I just don't know.
Right.
And this is why it was humbling. There are two cards that he had shown. And so I bought a couple of different cards from him. And I just wrote, if you ever have a Dick Kerr card or this other one that I wanted, please let me know. And he said, I will sell you one for my personal collection because I tried to, for him, it was about completing sets, and he was never able to complete the set. So this one card, he was willing to let go. He said, I'll sell it to you for the same price I had this other card, but this is a better quality card. And so this is like this totally roundabout way of securing a card, and it will take about 3 weeks. It's coming from France. And so I hope to get it graded. It's that good. And these were real athletes that beat men's teams in England. They even traveled to the US to tour, and, they were so good. It was one of the reasons they shut them down.
Wow.
But I think they were used as like a fundraiser, if you will. And I believe, I have to refresh my memory on the history, but I think it was around World War I. And they were used to raise funds. People would come and watch their games for the war effort, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but it's in the blog. But yeah, so, there are 2 cards made of them, not just one, and I was able to secure one. So the other one, I think you were talking about the Japanese runner, Hitomi.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that one.
So that one, I had to buy a book where she was pasted in with many other German trading cards from somebody in Germany who wouldn't sell it to me because he didn't want to pay the shipping to the US. He said, it's too expensive. No one wants to pay it. So I'm like, I have a friend who just moved to Switzerland. Send it to her. I'll get it eventually. So we actually were like FaceTiming that yesterday, or, the weekend. And so she opened it, showed it to me, and she's like, I love being on this adventure with you. And there was this card, beautiful. And I had seen it for sale. Somebody on eBay who was offering it for way too much money, like way beyond I was willing to pay. But I was able to secure this whole book. So even though it's pasted in a book, that's okay with me, because that's part of the history too. But that's what the Germans would do, and that's why there's so many international cards. They just had a different standard and a different value of competition in athletics in particular, but particularly for women, and particularly in Germany around the interwar era, time between World War I and World War II, where they were trying to rebuild their country. So it was this belief of, strong women made strong babies. And so they were okay with women doing sports like track and field and swimming, were the big ones that they really promoted and allowed women in. But it was always this tie to motherhood still. But that's why we see a lot of cards out of Germany. Plus they hosted the 36 Olympics. So that produced a lot of cards. And then after the war, the number of cards just plummets for a variety of reasons. And it's, starting to come back now. But in my collection, the 36 era was the apex.
So I know over here in the States, before and after the whole paper thing, right, in the war, we had, you mentioned it a little bit, there were several types of businesses or companies or markets actually producing trading cards, from candy, any kind of food, cereal, clothing, electronic, tobacco, right? Well, this was after tobacco, right? But was this the same type of thing going on in Germany and out of the States as well too? Were there several different type of markets producing cards?
Yeah, shoe polish stands out. Like there's a shoe polish company that has some cards that I've shared. Tobacco was definitely, had the lion's share of the market. Not sure why that was, but it just was. And coffee, it's not a German card. I think it might even be an American card, and it's a trade card, but it ties back to a piano and organ company. It's one of the early later 1900s cards that I have from the 1800s, 19th century, 1800s. You bought a piano and you could get a card. And so it's of this image of this woman with a tennis racket. So yeah, different companies latched onto this as a marketing way of selling. But, in the cigarette industry, competition was really fierce. And this was one of the ways that they used, to market and sell their product. And the fascinating thing with women's cards, is only that I have seen only like in this late 1800s period where they sexualized women. And they're usually drawings, sometimes they're actual photographs, but usually drawings of women in like these costumes that would not fit the Victorian era at all. Women, like you might have seen the gymnastics cards and either, what they're wearing or what they're doing. But then after that, I'm really impressed and happy to see that most of the cards portray women as athletes. It's almost like the sign of respect. I'm not
Right.
sure what was going on there, but yeah.
Right. I actually purchased some of those cards, not because I liked them, because they were history. And I thought
Mhm.
it wasn't attractive to me, but I thought it was, wow, this tells a point where how women were portrayed at this point in time. And
Yeah.
now I have cards that, you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
shows the growth and what we all learn.
Yeah.
Man, you put me onto another individual, and we're talking about people who made different cards. I want to pick your brain, and maybe our listeners and people can help me out because I know you already have this card. But you put me on to a woman, Alice Coachman, another amazing
Mhm.
individual, right? High jump event, right? First
Yep.
gold medalist in the
Yep.
black gold medalist in the high jump event.
Yep.
Amazing. And the women who she were, the teams that she was a part of in those Olympic that era was just amazing athletes and women. That time just seems like I know evolution and we get better with time, and we're faster and we're bigger and stronger now, but it just seems like that was a groundbreaking time
Yep.
for women's sports, just all women. I just hear so many great stories coming from those times. Alex Coachman specifically, I've got there aren't any cards of her from when she actually won, right?
Right.
Because there wasn't
That
any
I've
paper,
seen.
right?
Well,
But
yeah. Yeah. So she was 48, 1948 Olympics.
48,
Mhm.
1948 Olympics. But so I'm gonna share. People always want me to share my collection, and it's nothing fancy because when you know what I mean, it's nothing fancy at all. But I did try and go get an Alice Coachman collection. I'm gonna build my way up and tell you why I'm frustrated and the one card or cards that I cannot find. All right. So of course I have the upper
Yeah.
deck. You know
Yeah.
what I mean. Of course I have.
1996. Yeah. Oh,
Yep. Of course I have the
80s.
Olympics, and I have multiple.
Mhm.
I wanted to feel good like a big collector too, so I went and got the
Hey,
sheet,
hey.
and
All
it was
right.
already graded when I got it. You know what I mean? I
Nice.
didn't get it graded, but I wanted the sheet of Alex Coachman in
Yeah.
there at the same time.
Yep.
But then the only card I couldn't find was the Avon.
Ah.
Like
Let me
is
see if I have it. I'll look for it.
because I know you do. I believe you have two different versions. I remember you either sent them to me or you showed them to me before. Um, but yeah, like, I know that the reason those cards were made, I forgot what Olympics it was, but Avon sponsored it,
Hmm.
highlighting the win from the 19, I believe, 48 Olympics specifically. And that's why I know they did an Avon event at the year of the Olympics and highlighted Alice Coachman. I actually went and bought an actual ticket from the same exact day she won the gold medal.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. I
awesome.
forgot where I got it from, maybe Germany or somewhere out there too. But I actually have a ticket. I didn't bring it. I'm not going to leave to go get it, but I did get a ticket. I think it was August 14th or August 18th or something like that.
That's right.
1948. I made
Yeah.
sure it was a track and field one. I did my
Yeah.
research. You know what
That's
I
awesome.
mean?
That's great.
So I wanted that piece. I just wanted that piece of history. You know what I mean, to be able to
Hmm.
tell that. Are there any other cool stories or anything else you want to share or say about Alice Coachman?
Yeah, so Alice, grew up in the Jim Crow era, and it's just a shame that we don't have a card for her. But it's just kind of like missing athletes in history in the trading card world. She trained by tying a rope to two trees and jumping over them. Like at first, her parents didn't really want her to go into sports, and then I think they finally relented as she got better and better. But yeah, and it's a lot of times it's the same photograph that's used in the cards, and it's a shame that we don't see them until 40 some years later, 50 years later, that she
Right.
competed. And again, this is why I don't do aftermarket cards. Not that they weren't important, it's just it's telling that during the time, for whatever reason, if we're right that they don't exist, that nobody picked her up. It speaks to the level of racism that was going on in the country. Paper shortage or not,
Right.
somebody should have made a card of this woman as being the first in high jump to win a gold medal. So
Right.
it's just a shame that they don't, but I'm glad that they do in the aftermarket world to bring back that history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So I want you now to, if you can, if you may, I know you have a lot of different things going on, a lot of things that you want to continue to further, right? Pushing the stories of all these giant legends and old gals. What are we going? You gave me another one. What's the other phrase we're using now?
The other phrase.
I thought there was another one. Not old gals, not giant legends. It was something else. I forgot what it was you told me. But
Hmm.
but anyway, what's next? What's next for you? How are you going to continue to highlight these women, highlight these stories so that people hear about them, continue to share them,
Yeah.
so they inspire and so they never go away, because it's happening. I can feel it. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? I can really feel it happening to where women are starting to make more and
Yeah.
more, not just in life in general. Let's just talk about the hobby. There's more women in the hobby.
Mhm.
There's more creating going on. Women are confident. Women are learning more. They're adding value. They're pioneering. They're innovating. What are you doing? Because you're obviously one of those women, right? What are some of the things that you have upcoming or in the works?
Well, I've been working on a book about these cards, and it's kind of like women's sport history through the lens of
Mhm.
their own trading cards. So
Mhm.
I've written several of the chapters. I've put out a few proposals, waiting for a publisher to bite. I'm excited to see that the hobby has really taken off in a different way since the pandemic, in particular, that it's just exploded in popularity and sometimes in card values. But that general interest would make it more of interest for a publisher to invest into something that's never been out there before. There's a lot of books about trading cards and sport history, but nothing about women that puts these two together. So, fingers crossed, this will be one of the first, and you know, maybe there'll be a few additions if we can get that far, just because the collection does seem to grow daily.
It
So,
makes sense. It
yeah.
makes sense. It makes sense. I know you have more going on, but it makes sense that even in today, right? It hasn't been done, but today, placing value specifically, let's just say vintage women's cards. Right now, the real value for not even right now, for the past 15, 20 plus years, real value has been placed on rare and limited cards, stuff that you
Mhm.
can't get your hands on.
Yeah.
And as far as I've been looking into women's sports and trading cards, that there can be a strong argument that these might be some of the rarest cards out, specifically at a time if they none existed. What if more people like you started looking and actually were to find like one or a story that we don't, you know what I mean? So I think
Yeah.
it's important that that we continue to share these stories.
Yeah, and it's kind of a blessing and a curse with value going up, or interest, because interest can drive value or prices. I liked
Yeah.
it when they were not as expensive to secure, obviously, just for the volume that
Yeah.
I find and I get. And I've gotten to the point now, after doing this for over 2 decades, if I see a card I've never seen before, I will go after that card. And especially, of course, if it's an athlete that's done something um, remarkable in her athletic career. But yeah, it's great that there's more eyes on it, but it's not great when so I've never done this for the money. I rarely sell the cards. I'll sell the men's cards. Like when I buy mixed packs, I always put the men back on up for sale. But yeah, I've just never done this. My motivation's never been about money, and it probably never will be. It's always just about this like deep love and reverence for this history that I just didn't know about, and such a cool medium. So, to have to pay more for now just because of this peak in the market, it's kind of like, well, now my collection's worth more, but so what? Because I'm not going to sell it. So
Right.
yeah, it just
But
makes it harder more expensive to get cards.
it does, and it sucks, especially for me too, because I have a perfect example was this. Like nobody knew who this was. I think people want it because there's Cassius Clay on it. Honestly, I don't even think it's the Alex Coachman. But I was looking at how many times this was bought and sold. It was
Mhm.
originally bought for like sold for like $9, $10, but I had to buy it for almost 10x that. I didn't have
Yeah,
to, but I just
yeah.
wanted it. When you want something, I'm looking like,
Mhm.
man, last time it was sold for $18. But it's okay. I want
Yeah,
it and I don't want anybody else to have it. So I'm gonna get it right now.
cool.
But I honestly feel like a lot of these women and those cards and the stories in that time deserve that value. They deserve that spike. And it's a
Mhm.
sustainable spike. It's not one of those pump and dumps. It's wow. There's really maybe a handful of these cards if that, are the stories behind these cards that were printed at this era of these women. You know what I mean? Specifically
Yeah.
the ones that were printed in that time frame. I feel they deserve the same exact value as the men's cards that were printed in that time frame that are selling for millions. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's equal to me. I know that's not the way. It's not going to happen like that. It's never happened like that, but that's the way it should be. What's your luck like at card shows when looking for these cards?
Either way, it's a needle in a haystack. Whether it's online or in person, it's a needle in a haystack to find women's cards, and that's why it's kind of rewarding and fun when I do, and especially to see a card I've never seen before. It's the nice thing about card shows or stores is that relationship you build with the seller, whereas you don't always have that online as much, just because it's a different kind of communication. But meeting people through the hobby, like meeting you and meeting the other guys that have brought me on for interviews, and I mean, just people that just are in love with this hobby is our connection point. And even if we don't collect the same things, it doesn't matter. It's like we relate to each other, and we can understand why we'd spend hundreds maybe, or at least, up to that point, however much on a piece of paper. Like we get this kind of neuroses that we have.
Right. And that's the beautiful thing. I had him on a couple days ago. We had him on a couple days ago, or a few days ago. Van, the card professor, he's actually a educator as well too at the College of Alameda out here in California, in the Bay Area. And he always looks out for, he knows the story about you because he follows me, and he knows how passionate I am about the vintage women's cards, specifically the ones that I can share and tell histories and tell stories with. And whenever any of them come up on auction, he sends them to me.
Oh, that's
right.
funny.
And at first he sent them to me, but he didn't know what my budget range was. Like, people don't know I paid like $1 for those other cards. You know what I mean? And so I didn't know how high these auction prices can go. So once these cards get over like $70-$80, they're out of my budget. You know what I mean? There's some card. No, I don't think I've paid more for a card in the recent future. But I'll wait. I'm stubborn, or even though I may think the value is there, it's just I just can't do it. But Van always looks out for me whenever there's anything. And now it's to the point where if I don't get it, or if I don't want it, he says, "Pete, please let me know, because I'm going to bid on it. I like the card and I like the story." So I appreciate it. It spreads like wildfires. I remember another story. I remember this is back in my Clubhouse days. Clubhouse is an app on the phone where it's like a group chat you get on and you talk to a whole bunch of people. But I remember once I was talking about you, of course. I always get in the room and talk about other people because I feel like I'm a combination of other people. Everything, you know what I mean? It's not just me. So I'm talking about you and a host of other people too, not just you, but I'm talking about you. Okay. And I forgot the gentleman's name, right? But I just remember a few days later, he came, we were back in the Clubhouse room a few days later, and he said, "Pete, man, I was looking at GiantLegends page, and my wife leaned over and looked at it and asked what that was." And this guy's a heavy collector, hardcore collector, and his wife can't stand him collecting, doesn't understand anything about the cars, doesn't care less. It's like, he said, "Man, she looked over at it, asked me what it was. I told her whose page it was and what those pictures were, and she wants to collect cards."
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Right? Like that might not be everybody's story,
right?
But at the same time, people didn't know. And for somebody like, wow, now they may be able to share moments together. You know what I mean? In the hobby realm, because there's something. She's like, wow, there's another woman who, that's like me. I didn't know that they were. Call me crazy. I didn't know that there were like a lot of Black people in the hobby. There are, you know what I'm saying? It's not like sometimes I say we don't exist. No, we exist. We're just not seen. Like I was ignorant, and I used to say it too on Clubhouse. There aren't enough women in the hobby. No, they are there. I found you. They're there. There are women who have been carrying the torch for a while. I don't want to carry the torch. I want to continue to learn and push the narrative, you know what I mean, that you all have started and laid the foundation for. So I just want to thank you for that, because in the same way that Babe overcame a lot of things, maybe not in the same way, but in many ways, like we all know when we're passionate about something, like you were saying, even when you're doing your art, sometimes you feel failure in the middle of it. Like, is this going to come out right? Or this, you get frustrated, right? And as a collector, as a creator, as an artist too, even when I'm making a song, that frustration sometimes, you know what I'm saying, it comes up, and there's people who doubt you, whether you
Yeah.
see it, you feel it. You know when
Yeah.
you ask questions, or you know when you go into rooms and pitch your idea, you
Hmm.
can feel when somebody not just saying no to be nice, but they really just don't like it and think it's horrible. You know what I mean? So for you to just, it's, you've been collecting now for 30 straight years, and to stay in your lane and be committed to that when it can be talk about like talk about that real quick. I don't want to keep you all night, but to me, it seems like you're on an island. Are you on an island? Are there other? I know you're not. I know there are. I've met so many other vintage
Hmm.
collectors, like tennis
Yeah.
collectors and people who collect vintage cars, just like
Yeah.
you, via your page, by being a creep and going through your page and seeing, oh, okay, oh, that person collects cars just like her. But
Yeah.
are there any other people who? Because to me, you're on an island, and you know what I mean. And I know
Yeah.
that's not the case, but I know you may have felt like you're on an island sometimes. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I still kind of do in a
Mhm.
lot of ways. I mean, I have met people that will collect, say, a sport, and they have men and women. Anne Marie from Women on Tops is probably the only person I've met that is women's sports majority, if not only, I'm not sure, but majority. But she does a lot with contemporary cards and then some vintage. And I can't speak to how big her collection is, but it must be pretty massive because she posts a lot on
Right.
Instagram. But the Women on Tops page is really phenomenal. I've met people that like are big WNBA fans, which of course, you know, was post 90s,
Right.
and fantastic cards as well. So as far as the women's vintage and having this fairly narrow niche, I haven't, beyond Anne Marie of, you know, and again, people that have like there's a track collector and the tennis collector, and they have been a lot of fun to exchange a few correspondence with, and connect with people that have a similar passion. And the vintage tennis guy in particular has cards like I've never seen before, and it's like, I
His
want
page
that
is so
card.
cool, right? His page. I go to
Yeah.
his. I go to that page too,
Yeah.
and I learn a lot too. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. You know, and it's always that kind of a little bit of card envy when I see a card that I've never seen before, but then it adds to the wealth of, like, I can't put the image into the book without asking permission, of course, but you know, I can at least add it to the database and have it as a reference point. And it's just fascinating to see how many, you know, different countries around the world used cards and as their medium. And it's particularly sports, not exclusively, but particularly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So all
Yeah.
right. So before we get out of here, I what would you tell? What would you tell the collector you were, or the historian you were, the student you were of the hobby 30 years ago? Like, knowing what you know now, when you were at your first yard sale or doing that project, and you
Yeah.
know, when you first started it, what would you tell yourself?
You know, I think when you feel that electricity, when something just like resonates with you at a really deep level and you can't explain it, follow it. Because there is something there that you've had that reaction in your body, that excitement for some unknown reason, and just, you know, follow it. This is the fun we have in life, is to go with it. And it's not that I didn't. It's just it took me a little while to really focus in on a kind of a narrower time frame. But one of the things also I would tell myself is not to discount it, because I kind of have this inbred sometimes feeling about women's sports, even though I'm a huge advocate of women's sports. I remember once I was showing part of the collection. I brought like one of the notebooks to show a friend, and I was in a restaurant, and the male waiter came around and goes, "Oh, what's that?" And I said, "Oh, it's just women's sports." Like women's sports trading cards, because I'm thinking he wouldn't be interested in it. It's not guys. And
Right.
my friends like shunned me, and she's like, "Just women's sports? What are you
Yeah.
talking about? This is so cool." But I think part of it too is, um, you know, even though for you and me and a lot of other adults, it's not a kid's hobby anymore as much. But when we grew up in it, for whatever reason, it still has this association of being a kid's hobby. And so that devalues its importance. And, you know, when you think back to the day when these were cigarette cards, cigarettes were sold to adults. They weren't marketed to kids. They weren't sold to
Right.
kids. Maybe other products, of course, they weren't heavy into candy. So, you know, the collection element of it was a lot of adults. Some would, of course, hand them down to their kids. but there were a lot of adults that really liked these. And so I think it was two things. One of women's sports, and he wouldn't be interested in them, but also I have had to learn to really be proud that these are something special, and as trading cards or sport cards, that is a unique and valued form of ephemera in the world of sports history.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for your
Thank you
time.
so
Thank you.
much.
I know I'm gonna give. There's been a lot of people who've been in here, coming in and out and commenting. Pepino Man, thank you. Slab Strong,
Yeah.
Pepino Man saying he's really digging your passion for vintage sports. He's been commenting and engaging the whole time. I was real lucky. Me, myself, my brother, and Trail, we got to meet you at National. And
Yeah,
it
we
was
did. Yeah.
it was really one of those moments, y'all, for people watching and listening. For me, like I was it, just because man, I don't know how to. It's like meeting Cynthia Cooper and Cheryl Swoops or something. You know
Wow.
what I mean? It's like we no, like for real, for real. I mean, we both. It was kind of like the energy was the same when we met each
Yeah.
other. So I was flattered too, but I was really almost at a loss for words. This was the first time where I actually started sweating before I got on the live with somebody. Like, I don't want to let you down. People know how much I love. I don't want to ask the same question everybody else. I act like you're one of the, you know what I mean? Like I want to, like, how am I going to challenge her and how am I going to make sure she's having fun? Like I was almost scared. I was feeling scared and frightened, but not of you, just, of that. But we met at National. You inspired us in many ways. You even to Rip and to Slab, Javid and Marcus, my brothers, we made a song where we dedicated it to women athletes, right? Where we made a lot of women athletes. And to this day, some people may not know who we're talking about and they never will, but that wasn't important to us. To us is that when we make music or when we do things, it's that we're happy, but it's also that the people that we mentioned, things that we mentioned, they deserve delight too. So we gave people's names like Alex Coachman, I believe. Heidi Schmidt was in that song. May Fags was in the song. You were in that song. Cheryl Cooper, Swoops, Layla Ali, just a whole bunch of just as many women athletes as possible. And it's not the only time we've done it, but we wanted to be intentional about it. And what better than a song on Who Do You Collect? One of the hobby number one phrases, if not the number one phrase to say that was intentional. And it wouldn't have been done if not for you. The hobby would not have Who Do You Collect if not for you. So they don't know that. You know what I mean? I don't even think you know that.
I didn't know that. That's a great song.
That's a fact. And it's inspired by you. So I want you to know that you inspire more than, through the hobby, you inspire a lot. That's art, create, you know what I mean? So thank you for doing that. I hope people learned a lot today. Where can they reach you if they want to ask you some questions, or maybe they have a card that you need or something like that, or you're looking for? Where can they find you?
On her mark sport at gmail.com is probably the best email. And I'd have to, give you, Peter, a fantastic shout out, a big shout out too. You inspire me. Your work is amazing. The creativity you and your team does, and your videos. I mean, just the imagination you have, the lyrics, the videos, the creativity, your passion for sports, your passion for working with kids. It is equally inspiring, and it has been a joy to be on your show.
Thank you so much. And I have to give the flowers right back to everybody else who made us the way we are, the community and the villages that raised us, people like you and educators and family and children, many children who I've learned from, and I've been able to take what I like about them and make who I am today. So that's who you have in front of me, is everybody who've ever loved me is who's loving you right back. So thank you so much. We're definitely going to run this back again. And like I tell everybody, the second time we run it back, I want to do it more in a way where it's more engaging, to where we take, even because this time we didn't take any time to prep or anything. I actually want to have a teaching. I want to be, it's more educational and purposeful. So it might not be an hour and a half, maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes, but we tag team on something that we both are passionate about, or that we both want to learn about. Whatever it is, we'll come up with that when that time comes. But I definitely want every time we meet on this platform to grow, and you know what I mean, to be a little bit different. So
cool. All right.
Thank you for your time. Happy New Year, everybody. Happy New Year. I'll talk to you again soon, real soon.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.